move on to the focus session 2. The second session for today is Why Bharat Matters, mapping India's rise as a civilizational state, based on Honorable Minister S. Jaishankar's book, Why Bharat Matters. May I request our session chair and distinguished speaker, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, to deliver her introductory remarks. We'd like to take a moment and congratulate Ambassador Puri for her newly published book, Swallowing the Sun, which has become a bestseller. Lakshmi Murdeshwar Puri is a former Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and the former Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Prior to her 15-year stint at the UN, she served as an Indian diplomat for 28 years. From 1999 until 2002, she was India's ambassador to Hungary, while also concurrently accredited to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Most recently, she has authored Swallowing the Sun, published by a book company. The book has already become a bestseller. So, please, and ma'am, may we request you to please adhere to the time limit of 20 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Namaskar. It's a pleasure to be back here again at the Rana Pratap geopolitical conference. And I think the very fact that we invoke him and his contribution is a tribute to India's civilizational reclaiming that we are going to be talking about. And we have a wonderful panel which is going to be discussing this important topic. Of course, the External Affairs Minister's book, Why Bharat Matters, and before that, the India Way. But the broader topic of why Bharat matters and how do we map the rise of India as a civilizational state. I want to start by really recalling, in the Upanishadic way, that there are 4 stages of consciousness. The wakeful, the dream, the deep sleep, and then you ascend to the 4th, higher state of ekatma, or self-realization, with transcendental consciousness about itself and its purpose in the world and in the universe. And that's where India is now moving. That state of ekatma, that state of self-realization. And that is the essence of what we call the civilizational state. Also, one key reason for this civilizational awakening that is happening now in India, and the comprehensive narrative, that's the other aspect. Narratives are so important today in terms of positioning countries, but also how countries perceive themselves and how the world perceives themselves, perceives these countries. So there is a comprehensive narrative of Nava Bharat, new India, but Bharat, that is being built to infuse our cultural, political, social being nationally, and its projection and use internationally. And a resurgent India fits the moniker of a civilizational state, as it represents not only a political entity confined to certain geographical boundaries, defining its own values and way of life, drawing upon millennia-long cultural continuity and heritage. And that is, of course, millennia-old, that is the unique if you will, the exceptionalism of India and its civilizational state. It is a superset to the concept of India as a Westphalian nation-state in existence since 1947, characterized by sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the concept of citizenship and governance based on legal definitions resting on one or two axes of identity, whether it's ethnicity, language, etc. And it cuts across, but is not limited to such aspects. And Ernest Gellner famously defined nationhood as building a political roof over one's cultural head. India is that roof of a political state, but Bharat is the civilizational head. So that is the essence of why Bharat matters and how India is emerging as a civilization. Also, under Prime Minister Modi, for the first time, India's civilizational state has an ambition of its own to reclaim and project the cultural influence and leverage as a force multiplier for its political and economic influence that exceeds far beyond the physical boundaries, temporal and spatial, in regional and in the global arena, on land and across the, even beyond the Indian Ocean, the only ocean named after a country, and into the Indo-Pacific and beyond, as we know. So, and then it is also seen by Prime Minister Modi as a way of internal integration. And I don't want to go into the details of it, but symbols, concepts, and personalities evoked from this treasure trove of our civilizational past are important for us today as Indians, but also for the world. Because it, of course, as Indian, gives us pride and confidence. And remember that one of the first things colonizers do is to take away your pride, to take away your confidence. And when you are decolonizing, you know, we are talking about this concept of the post-colonial era, where we are trying to rebuild the confidence. And I think Prime Minister Modi refers to Gulami ki Mansikta, shedding that. In that context, it's so important that you instill pride and confidence through, you know, back to the future, exercising in invoking civilizational symbols, and I think our speakers are going to refer to that further. So, and it is about also the collective identity as much as it is about resisting the other's hegemony, and that is the full construct of the civilization state. And then G20 presidency was the platform for India to demonstrate this, to be also to indicate that its brand of civilizational state is not the one that the Western, although they didn't call it directly that, and there is a lot of literature which I've looked at, which is critical of the concept of civilizational state. But Indian concept of the civilizational state has been demonstrated through its G20 presidency of being of a kind which is a force for good, not intending to set up a global empire, as the other civilizational states have done in the past, the Western civilization, but also now equally China and some others. So, when we look at at this point of time, it's also been many eminent and objective observers, and not only Indian ones, and international institutions have called it India's moment, India's decade, and even India's century, based on a number of metrics. And there are the tangible factors, both internal to India and in the international environment, to support that. But there is some new alchemy at work. There is that soul force that is at play beyond these temporal factors, which I'm going to also refer to. And then, of course, we have the Amrit Kal, the period that is going to lead us to the goal of 2047, Vikasit Bharat, India as a developed country goal, and the golden period thereafter. But also not only for India, and that is the other aspect of India's civilizational state. It is because it is powered by the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And in that sense, I would like to identify, because I was looking at how could we characterize India's, what is special, what is the exceptionalism of India in terms of its civilizational state conception. I could identify some 6 characteristics. One is excellence and a deep faith, as Swami Vivekananda said, in the perfectibility of humanity. That's one. The other is that universalist outlook and vision, inclusive and tolerant. Because there's been some criticism that this is about majoritarianism, ethnocentrism, and everything else. It is not that. On the contrary. The third aspect is the spirit of inquiry. Indian civilization has been marked by, whether it is in philosophy, the purpose of life, how to get there. You know, it's always a constant spirit of inquiry. Then the idea of sustainability is ingrained in the Indian civilization, and frugality. And all of that, I'm going to say how it's going to be, and our panelists will do that too. And then there is the innovation, that we always innovate, reinvent ourselves in every way, but also scientific innovation as well as political, social, and economic innovation. And the force for good part, which I already mentioned, the dharma part, as much as it is about dharma for everyone, for the benefit of everyone, and then the concept of one earth, one family, and one future. So very quickly, if I look at the temporal achievements, one is that India, and why India matters in that context, and how civilizationally ideas have been brought in. I won't go into the details, but it has become the fastest growing and soon to be third largest economy, and a regional and global engine for growth at a time when the world economy is, other countries are stagnating or even having negative growth. And also, it has the potential of being a leader in re-globalization at a time when deglobalization is happening, and also it is seeking very much to become part of the production diversification base, as well as beneficiary, hopefully, of friendshoring. Then on SDGs and its ability taking people out of poverty, and its development philosophy. And there again, Sarvodaya and Antodaya, these are civilizational values, again reflected in the SDGs. If India succeeds, and India is pursuing the achievement of these with heart and mind and resources, and so if India achieves, then the world achieves. So that's why India matters also in delivering for the world and with the world the sustainable development goals. And then of course, how it is a voice of the global south, how it is reaching out and working for the global south. And that's the other element which is part of this civilizational outreach. Then the issue of democracy, that so far we had been talking of India being the largest democracy. But now we are saying not only that, we are also the oldest democracy, the mother of democracy. And we are invoking the republics of 600 BC to say that we were the progenitors of democracy. Also, to tell those who would like to be judgmental about India's democracy, how it works. In fact, it is a sterling example of how with all the challenges of diversity, the vibrancy of it all, India has kept faith with democracy. And this is a model not only for the global south, but also for the north. And it's time that it is recognized in the world, as it is often, but sometimes it is misinterpreted and motivationally so. And then, of course, the demographics and the youth. The demographic dividend, the youth dividend, it is the youngest, the largest cohort of youth in the world, and the youth power dividend, and also the Nari Shakti dividend. So this, the Yuva Shakti, the Nari Shakti, and this whole concept of Shakti, that is being invoked to mobilize these, this power that we have, is also something which is linked to why India matters, Bharat matters. And then there is the environmental aspect, and I mentioned how sustainability is so ingrained. And India has put forward, made its own down payments, but also put forward its own vision of sustainable lifestyles, concept of the Prime Minister, which has now become part of G20. And also, India has put forward its own contribution in terms of renewables, and there's talk now of solar global grid and all of that. And how to, really also for the North to meet their down payments in terms of their own cutbacks of emissions, etc., but also finance and technology. This whole aspect of environmental justice, climate justice, energy justice. Peace and security, I think others are going to speak to it, but I just want to say that ahimsa, I think it was mentioned before, ahimsa has certainly been a civilizational value, but there is also the other side to it, which is Shakti. That you cannot, or India has also signaled very clearly, that if it is threatened, if it's territorial integrity, if it's in other ways threatened, then it will, the aggressor would have to pay a heavy price. So I think there is that aspect also which comes in. And also these kind of symbols are evoked. For example, when the moon landing took place, Chandrayaan, it was called the Shiv Shakti point. Then we have the technology 4.0, and I want to particularly mention how because of this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam approach and Sarvodaya approach, there has been the digital public infrastructure, which is now under the G20 being made available also to the rest of the world, particularly to the global south. And also I think what we did in the humanitarian area, particularly during the COVID-19, should never be forgotten, because that really showed our civilizational hallmark of compassion. And 300 million vaccines were sent out to 120 countries at a time when no others, more capable countries at that time, richer countries, were looking inward and not reaching out to those who were in dire need of them. I think that, and India's continued support, including during the natural disasters that different countries face, Turkey included, every time there is Myanmar, Sudan. So that is the other aspect that we have to look at. So India presents a third, more beneficent and positive civilizational pole. This is something that we would like to emphasize. And lastly, our confidence in our own civilizational rebirth is itself a game changer. We have to move from that to increase and spread our soft power, even as we grow our hard power. And one lesson that we have learned from our millennia-old history is that ultimately we will not prevail civilizationally either if we don't grow our hard power. And that is the combination that works. But, as I said, we are not wanting to use our civilizational force, if you will, for global empire of the bad, but for global public good. So that is something that we have to emphasize. And when we are refuting Western constructs, one of the important things that we need to do is to stop seeking their acknowledgement, their judgment over our civilizational state. We must evolve our own metrics, our own criteria, our own templates for judging the worth of other countries and civilizations and their systems and their contribution to humanity. And that is something that we have learned from in the certainly last 5 years in particular, but even before that. So from this 5,000 years old tree of wisdom emanate various branches of social, political, spiritual and transcendental thought that govern everyday life in India. And today they manifest themselves in Prime Minister Modi's India's vision and policy making on and for global public good. I now call upon our panelists, our distinguished panelists, all of whom I've had the privilege of working with. Please come to the podium as I introduce them. Ambassador Pankaj Saran. He is a former distinguished diplomat, for 40 years of experience in foreign strategic and national security affairs. He's been ambassador in several places, and he has served as the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Affairs under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, dealing with regional and global strategy formulation, including maritime security and Arctic affairs, neighborhood policy and technology, and economic security. He is also the convener of NATSTAT, a Delhi-based independent center for research on strategic and security issues. He is also a member of the National Security Advisory Board and a distinguished fellow of the National Maritime Foundation. Ravi Solanki, he joined the Indian Police Service in 1981 and served for 13 years in the cadre of Assam, Meghalaya, Ministry of Home Affairs and Cabinet Secretariat, and later joined UN High Commission for Refugees in 1994. He worked for 27 years in the United Nations and UNHCR and retired in 2021. He is presently, he lives in Bangkok, but he loves India too much and this forum. So come back and thanks for coming back again. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat is the former Indian ambassador to Jordan, Libya and Malta, and is currently a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. He also served as Director General Joint Secretary in the Gulf and Hajj divisions in the Ministry of External Affairs, and he's also been in Moscow, Deputy Chief of Mission in Moscow. He is also on the Board of Advisors as Usanas Foundation, so this is very much home ground for you. But he's very much an expert on almost anything, on foreign policy and security policy. I'm amazed at his, the range of his expertise. Dr. Abhinav Pandya, of course, you all know, the founder and CEO of the Usanas Foundation. He has worked in Kashmir as a field researcher and rendered advice on security and strategic matters to the governor of Jammu and Kashmir. He's published 150 plus articles and research papers on foreign policy, intelligence and security issues. And he's also authored 2 books, Radicalization in India by an Exploration and Terror Financing in Kashmir. Previously, he had worked with the United Nations. So we have this wonderful panel on the why, how, and what of why India matters, and mapping the rise of India as a civilization state.
The importance of the concept of civilizations when it comes to talking about the global architecture. So, I mean, when you were discussing the idea, what came to my mind were 2 well-known seminal articles which I would refer to for the sake of the international foreign audience. Of course, one was Francis Fukuyama's concept that history had ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then Samuel Huntington said that the future of the world and the future forms of conflict would essentially be nothing but a class of civilizations. And so today, 30 years down the line, we have the opportunity to look back in hindsight and ask ourselves whether those contrasting concepts and visions of the global architecture are valid or not. A lot of people have asked me, particularly from the West, whether India is going to be the next China. And that's a very loaded question, because the fact is that we are the non-West, and therefore to that extent difficult to understand. And so when they, in the kind of binary or rather black and white kind of vision of the world, find it difficult to comprehend how a society or a civilization or a nation cannot be a mirror image of themselves. And this whole question about the universality of a liberal democracy or a liberal principles of existence, how do you relate to that, and how do you deal with non-Western civilizations? So when you look at some of, let's say, the literature coming out of China on how China views itself and how China explains its own rise, it is actually a classical case of a non-Western civilization talking about its own personality. And I think what is happening in India in the last few years is that the idea that multipolarity is not, so in a sense we are questioning even the concept of multipolarity by talking of multi-civilizational global orders. And the point I think that the strategic and the leadership is beginning to more and more reflect on is whether we look at ourselves as just a pole in a multipolar arrangement, or we emphasize our civilizational identity and we look at the world through civilizational eyes, which basically means Persia or Iran or China or India or maybe Russia. And so what happens then to the post-World War II Western liberal democratic world order? And so therefore there is obviously a sense of discomfort by the status quo's powers about what this all means for global stability and which way is the world headed in the next 10-20 years. And what is it about this whole civilizational narrative that we need to be concerned about? Does it threaten global stability, or does it contribute to global stability? Does it actually question the universality of certain values which we had all agreed upon? For example, let's say in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this idea of a multicultural kind of a world order is good for some people, but it creates discomfort for many others. And as we discussed, I thought I'd just reduce some of these concepts to practical examples from a kind of a bit of a practitioner's point of view. I think one of the real contributions that we made was actually in the way in which we got the West and Russia together in the G20 communique. So Indonesia tried it in 2022 during the G20 summit. They achieved some success, but the fact that in New Delhi 3-4 months ago we managed to get language on Ukraine which was acceptable to the G7, the NATO, the collective West, and to Russia. And the fact that we got the language which did not condemn Russia, but was accepted by the West, I think that really shook up everyone and kind of showed that India actually could bring common ground to a situation or to an issue which literally has divided the world and split it down the middle. So that, I think, for the young Indian audience, I would say here, is something that was quite remarkable. And in my own view, I think, sticking to Ukraine as an example, I think the space to watch out for in the next few months is going to be a greater Indian visibility in trying to bring the conflicting or the warring sides together on the table. And I think that will, there's enough straws in the wind to show that we will be heading more and more into that direction. So that's one example of why India can and has played a role and why it is positioning itself. And therefore, the initial Western criticism of the Indian position on Ukraine is today tempered, and it's less than what it was 2 years ago. So we have a situation where India is what it said the week after the outbreak of the war, and what is happening today makes a lot of sense because people are realizing, the whole talk about a peace summit and so on, that at the end of the day, you really have to sit and talk. So that's one example I would like to just offer. The second thing is this whole, I know there is a lot of talk about the confusion in the Indian strategic mind, that we are in the Quad, we are in BRICS, we are in SCO. What are we? Are we confused? Or is this just trying to manage and muddle through life? But I would say that there is a great degree of thought that is being given to it. And one of the aspects or the evidence of this success of this policy today is that if you look at the quadrangle of the United States, Russia, China, and India, what you see is that each of these powers, major powers, they are all trying to woo India to have India on their side. So if it's the Americans, they would like you to be more aligned and think and have the same kind of worldview as the Americans. The same applies to the Russians, and paradoxically, even the Chinese actually would like to, at the end of the day, have a more cooperative India on their side. So we are positioned in a sense, in a position where we can make our presence felt. And the last point, I'll just stop here about why India or Bharat matters, is that people are coming to realize two things. Number one, that we are no longer just part of the problem, we are actually part of the solution to existential global problems. And the proof of the pudding is the fact that we are there on every single important international platform, which we were not there earlier. So that's the first. The second is that we matter because India's success matters. For a society of 1.4 billion people, if they succeed, that is going to contribute to global success. So, so apart from everything else which we bring to the table, and that newfound realization that you have spoken of, these are all the factors, in my opinion, which kind of tell us why and explain a lot of what we are doing. And of course, in the neighborhood, it has already been discussed in the earlier sessions about what India is doing, and the concept of the neighborhood also in this Indian strategic mind has changed in the last 10 years. So we are no longer boxed into this peninsula area. And again, going back to what Mr. Akbar was saying about words, and I am a firm believer in, and again for the young audience, words matter. The question is whether you call your neighborhood South Asia or you call it the Indian subcontinent. And that defines how you approach who your neighbors are. And the question of what is your neighborhood is also very critical. And I think there also there is an expansion of the mind, or the strategic mind in India. And unless you don't know who you are or what is your area of interest, you will always reduce yourself to a much lesser level of competency and operations than if you were to open your mind and be prepared to take on bigger and bigger responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. End of history didn't materialize. And that's always disappointing. And then there are these claims now, including by us, that and the multipolarity extending into multi-civilizational world that is emerging. Ravi, would you like? Anil? Acha. Okay, Anil, you're going to tell us about the book, EAM's book, and what's in it on this subject. In fact, he has laid out the blueprint.
Thank you, ma'am. In fact, on this subject, what you have said, and Ambassador Pankaj Saran, I think says it all. And I had told him while coming up on the stage that I yield you my 8 minutes, because Ambassador Puri has said everything. Frankly, this book, I think, needs to be read at least twice. The first one needed to be read 3 times to be able to understand the whole dynamic. And it's very timely. In this particular book and the previous one, if you were to look at it, what, from my point of view, Dr. Jaishankar has tried to do is connect India to its civilizational glorious past through the Ramayana, Mahabharata stories, brought them into the current political construct and India's economic story, and the adept handling of very complicated issues outside, as well as the challenges. And then he is taking and transporting it into another glorious future. That is very important. He has, of course, spoken about his book, and there are several videos available. Those of you who have not read it must read it. It's a very important. In my view, it is a report card of 10 years for the government as far as the foreign policy is concerned, and very clearly articulated. And that's why today we are talking about India's station in the global discourse. And it has started off, a lot of initiatives started during recent times. One of the most important in my view was, because as has been said that we need a comprehensive power, and in that comprehensive power it is very important to be militarily very strong, economically very strong. But just a food for thought, in the 20th and 21st century, all major superpowers have lost all the wars. You look at China and Vietnam, US and Vietnam, you look at US and Afghanistan, you look at Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And in the 19th century it was the British. So power alone cannot get you the place that you can. The civilizational heritage that India boasts of, when we talk about that we gave the world the zero, the numbers which were carried by the Western Arabic traders and others to the West. Today's technology revolution, the IT revolution owes those binary numbers. If there were no zero, there was no one, you would not have the equations. So it is not something that we are talking about fresh. We are reclaiming that particular heritage that we always had, subjected to various colonial mindsets. You know, again, I saw Dr. Shashi Tharoor's talk at the Oxford University, where he said that 27% of the global GDP was accounted by India at one time. We may not agree. 3 times, yes. So, and preparation cost would make, and those of you who have visited the British Foreign Office, you will find that the building, in that building, the India section is the most beautiful and well curated, courtesy the theft that occurred from here. Now, what we are looking at today, and as Ambassador Saran also mentioned, why are we in a there are normative factors which everybody knows about, that you are the largest country in the world, therefore you're going to be a very big market in the world, a great trillions of dollars worth of opportunity going forward, you are the fastest growing major economy in the world. You're going to be, the only lag that we have today, and which is going to be a very defining feature, and that is the technological lag. We have, for some reason, we were far superior as far as technologies were concerned. At least thoughts were concerned. But today, that is where we have not invested enough in our R&D and all. But look at the other side, that we have that human resource which can provide us that edge once again. IT revolution or IT growth of United States owes a great deal to the Indians. And we can reclaim it for ourselves. So I think that Dr. Jaishankar's book, in that sense, provides us a great landscape. And like, for example, when he compares Quad to Bharat Milap, for example, or when he says that Hanuman did not know what his powers were in this, and they need to be reminded of that. So like, for example, like in yoga, everybody, most of the people did it before that. But we did not think that let us internationalize it. It was Prime Minister Modi's idea, and as our colleague, Ambassador Mukherjee, who was the UNPR at the time, he mentioned in his book that he was given an X amount of time to marshal this and to get carried forward. And 177 countries, an unprecedented support to this kind of thing from across geographies, across religions. And it has become a major thing. And it is associated with India. When you say that we are the first responder, not in the military domain per se, but using the military prowess to provide succor and relief to the various countries in the world. And that is what takes us. When the world was keeping it, and when we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is one family, I think it's been in our DNA. It's always been there. And it's always comes out whenever there is a need. Share and care attitude. We have a capacity building program, ITEC program, of last 160 years actually. 1964 we started. Supported a large number, 161 countries in the world are being supported by India through that. That's not a mean achievement by a developing country and now getting into becoming a major power. Now, those are the important things. I remember when I was in Oxford and Ambassador Tirumurthy was working with the Foreign Secretary, and when we had our nuclear tests, all the Western people in the dining hall when used to go, they would start chasing me. Is that India is a poor country? Why did you have to do the nuclear tests and all that? You'll be surprised that all the people who were from developing countries, every single one of them, Africans and other students, they will come to me, we are very proud of India, because it is India which has done it. So the feeling is very much a part of the narrative that has been there. And now we are building it because of our strengths that have always existed and are continuing to exist. Now, ma'am, I just close by because time is short. that we, just now you mentioned that China, USA needs us to contain China. China appreciates our strategic autonomy policy. Russia is strict. I mean, you'll be surprised how many times President Putin has praised Prime Minister openly so many times, including very recently also. He leaves no opportunity to mention that how India is progressing now. So that is something, that says something, that when superpowers are acknowledging your presence on the global landscape, that's a very important thing to do. So we say that we are ambidextrous, we work with everyone, whether it's a BRICS or Quad or whatever it is. Then for me, let me just summarize it by saying why Bharat. Bharat stands for me. Earlier we used to say about India as the synonym, various abbreviations. I see that Bharat is the biggest country by population, means big purchasing power and market, benign yet assertive power, bridge between east and west and north and south. H stands for home of morality and spirituality. A is action and result-oriented foreign policy. R, reform, perform and transform, is the mantra across the spectrum. India wants to be a rule maker, a rule shaper, no longer a rule taker. A stands for it assumes responsibility and leadership, abandoning hesitations of history. T, tackles engagement and entanglement adroitly. India has shown to the world that democracy of our size, 1/6 of the humanity, can deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful distillation of the wisdom of the book and the significance of where we have arrived and what that churning of the Samudra Manthan of the last 10 years has yielded in terms of our coming of age as a civilizational state. Ravi? Okay, sure.
Puri, Ambassador Trigunayat, Ambassador Saran, and Mr. Abhinav. This is a great pleasure for me to have come back again to Usanas. I thank you very much for this invitation. Much has been spoken about from your perspective. Since I've worked in the UN for a very long time, I will try to concentrate a little bit more on our peacekeeping missions, our peace building, peacekeeping efforts, and also on what we as Indian or we as Bharatvasi are proud of. So just to reiterate few points, I have made some points here. So basically, every 6th person on the planet is Indian. We all know that. Then we are the world's largest democracy, world's largest generation of young people. Ma'am, you had already alluded to that point. And the 5th largest economy, soon poised to be the 4th largest economy in the world. We are the founder members of the United Nations and also the drafters of the UN Charter. We are responsible world power. We have never invaded any country and we have never had any hegemony designs or interests. I mean, these things make us very unique in the current world politics. Now, our nuclear policy is peaceful, but at the same time also a deterrent policy. In the UN resolutions, we see we are the strongest advocates of disarmament. But at the same time, yes, we do pursue our nuclear policy. Much has been said about the Vasudhaiva Kutumbam and also the Vishwamitra. Our vaccine policy has been already alluded to. As I speak, at this point of time, India is evacuating people from Haiti. This has just been announced by the foreign minister. And before that, we have done so many other missions. When the earthquake struck in Nepal, our aircrafts went there, and not only Indians, other nationalities were also evacuated. In Sudan, in terms of disaster response, when we had the earthquake in Turkey, we were the first responders there to provide help. So, in that sense, India is also the birthplace of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and also the land where teachings of Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Sufi tradition of Islam are there. Today we have a nation of unparalleled diversity. Some of us have come from Delhi, and you know very well in Delhi, we have 28 states and 8 union territories. You will find Himachal Bhavan, you will find Bihar Bhavan. I mean, these are all embodiments of how that unity is translated into diversity is translated into unity. So, on the peacekeeping missions, we have seen that our contribution has been remarkable. We have participated in almost 49 out of the 71 peacekeeping missions thus far. We have also provided 70 force commanders to the United Nations. Way back in 92-93, the first force commander in ex-Yugoslavia was General Satish Nambiar, and we all know his contributions in that period. Also, we have also provided the first Mahila battalion, all police battalion in 2007 in Liberia. This is unparalleled. It was never ever done before. We also had the first female police advisor to the Secretary General. You've all heard of Kiran Bedi. She was the police advisor way back in the Secretary General's office. And also we have seen that, we are the founder members of the non-alignment movement, the G77. We are leading advocates for the concerns and aspirations of developing countries, especially the global south. I think, I don't know, many of you have heard the name of Hansa Mehta. Yes. Hansa Mehta was our first delegate. She was the Indian delegate to the International Human Rights Commission way back in 47-48. And at that point of time, she was instrumental in changing the wording, because initially it was drafted as all men are born equal and free, and she changed it to all human beings are born free and equal. That shows that highlighting the gender equality at that period of time. So at the end of this, I would only say that the contributions that India has done to the United Nations and the peacekeepings are tremendous. Of course, we also lost 177 people till today. 177 Indians have lost their lives in line of duty serving the United Nations. It's a big sacrifice, but at the same time, well acclaimed that India is a professional and a very competent force in peace building and peacekeeping. I'll end here in the interest of time. I'm thankful that there was no buzzer to caution me. And ma'am, may I please allow me to compliment you on your blue sari as United Nations staff member. Thank you.
Well, I think India's civilizational energy is needed, called a dysfunctional gridlock. And I think at the G20, this is what was attempted in terms of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. And I'm not as, I know Thiru is here, he has been a warrior out there in the frontier on UN Security Council reform. But also there were other attempts that have been made and initiatives taken on the World Bank and IMF and other international organizations, WHO, NIFORM. All of these are going to be critical for the working out of what I would call the planetary civilization. And India's contribution to that has been and will continue to be critical. So, Abhinav, you have the last word, and I believe you're going to be giving us some illustrations of how we invoke our heroes from the past, the symbols from the past, or thought processes and ideas and concepts from the past to illuminate the present and inspire the future.
for the generous introduction and for setting a nice outline for this session. Ambassador Trigunayat discussed about the comprehensive power of a nation. Well, definitely military strength and economic strength, they do constitute the core strengths, but in my this part of this brief lecture speech, I'm going to focus most on the civilization aspect. The first fundamental question that comes into play we need to ask is that why are we discussing this topic? A very crucial reason is that today we have a system in place, we have a leadership which is not ashamed about India's civilizational glory, its religious heritage, its cultural heritage, its scriptures. They are very proud to accept it and they are very proud to research more into it. I mean, 10-15 years back, it was difficult to imagine India's foreign minister quoting examples from Ramayana to explain a very typical geopolitical construct like Indo-Pacific. So today, we don't see any derision of India's civilizational wisdom, India's scriptures. However, having said that, I must say that definitely there is a sense of optimism and confidence rather. But then, I think in terms of its manifestation, it should not be confined to mere rhetoric and verbal abuse of the past, which only makes the entire framework very polarized and it unleashes the forces of de-intellectualizing the society. What we have right now is a system in place, a leadership which is unleashing new forces which are changing the mindset and in a very revolutionary manner. So I think this is a time to get into a proper research in a very scientific and systematic manner to explore our civilizational wisdom and civilizational knowledge on the matters of strategy, diplomacy, statecraft, governance, security and foreign policy. For that, what we need to do, I guess we need to explore our ancient texts like Kamandak Niti Sar, Arthashastra, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bharatari's Niti Shatak and Kuran. Now, Maharaj Bharatari wrote three seminal texts, Vairagya Shatak, Niti Shatak and Shrangar Shatak. Seminal texts. Now, Niti Shatak is an expert commentary on matters pertaining to state, administration, diplomacy, security issues. I think what we need right now is a good input from the academics getting into some very hardcore, proper, systematic research based on evidence-based and very scientific methodologies. And they can come out with like good papers on the Scopus Index journals or prestigious journals. Our ancient thought on strategy and diplomacy is very refined. So the Shukra Niti stands on 4 pillars of Sam, Dam, Dand and Ved. And these 4 pillars need to be used in the same order. First you use Sam, which is praise, and then Dam, which is monetary incentives, then Dand, which is punishment, and then dissension. Okay. And they can be case studies. We can do the case studies on how Magadhans, they liquidated the Vajji Republic using these tactics. We can do case studies on the intelligence and diplomatic practices of Cholas, Mauryas, Guptas, and Maharana Pratap. And when I say case study and research, it means serious research. I'll just quote an example from how Lord Hanumanji used these 4 tactics, Sam, Dam, Dand and Ved, from a very famous poem which Ramdhari Singh Dinkarji had written. So there is a dialogue between Lord Hanumanji and Surya. When Lakshman was fatally hit by that arrow and he had to go to get the Sanjeevani Putti, about which Ambassador Sajjanar also mentioned, he had to reach the place, reach Lanka back before the sunrise. So he goes to sun and he approaches sun, and in this dialogue he is using Sam, Dam, Dand and Ved. He says, "Hey Suraj, itna yaad rahe, sankat ek Suraj vansh pe hai, Lanka ke नीच राहु द्वारा आघात दिनेश अंश पर है, इसलिए छिपे रहना भगवन जब तक जड़ी पहुंचा दूं मैं, बस तभी प्रकट होना दिनकर जब संकट निशा मिटा दूं मैं, मेरे आने से पहले यदि किरणों का चमत्कार होगा तो सूर्य वंश में सूर्यदेव निश्चित ही अंधकार होगा." Until now this is Sam, praising him and just convincing him. Okay. After that another, आशा है स्वल्प प्रार्थना ये सच्चे जी से स्वीकारोगे, आतुर की आर्त अवस्था को होकर करुणार्थ निहारोगे. Now this is getting a degree higher. That yes, I expected that you will better do it. It's a very veiled threat, Then अन्यथा क्षमा करना दिनकर, अंजनी तने से पाला है, बचपन से जान रहे हो तुम हनुमत कितना मतवाला है. So Hanumanji is very famous to have swallowed the sun. And you wrote without swallowing the sun. Yeah. So he is giving that threat, you know. मुख में तुमको धर रखने का फिर वही क्रूर साधन होगा, बंदी मोचन तब होगा जब लक्ष्मण का दुख मोचन होगा. If you don't, you know, do this, again I'll just, you know, swallow you and I'll keep you inside my mouth until the time, you know, Lakshman gets, he recovers. So this is just one example, and from these little mythological texts, I think we need to explore more, and that too in a very scientific manner. What I want to say is that most of the Western IR theories, they are basically the product of the Western historical experiences, typical Western historical experiences, and they include slavery, apartheid, Renaissance, slave trade, crusades, clash between the church and the state, capitalism, colonialism, world wars, Cold War, racism, arms race, economic recession, invasions, persecution of religious and ethnic minorities, rational ideas and scientists. But our experience is different. India's civilizational experience is very different. India has given the idea of Dharma Vijaya to the world. Our definitions are different. The way we define Dharma, democracy and nationalism are quite different from the Western understanding. Here we are not in a race with the Greeks for the invention of the idea of democracy. We just need to explore what are our thoughts, how we thought about democracy. And we don't need any lecturing and sermonizing from the far quarters of the world about democracy and human rights. We have a very distinct civilizational identity. And I must appreciate that Chinese, as of now, they are doing a far better job in that. Ambassador Saran discussed about multipolarity. Tomorrow we have a session on multipolarity. India has its first interface with multipolarity during the Vedic times. We had 16 Mahajanpadas, 16 states sprawling from Afghanistan, northern Iran to the Bengal border. There was a multipolar world order. Then we need to explore India's own IR theoretical frameworks. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is one such framework. Many people believe that it is just one docile abstract idea. No, it's not. It's a proper IR theory which has its own systematic, own devices of punishment. Like when we say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, whole world is one family. So in one family you have a family leader, but the family leader is not a hegemon. And then when you have errant members in their family, there are provisions for punishment, for reprimand. And that system is much better because that's a very informal and a fluid system. I mean, you're not obeying the family leader just out of fear. You're obeying him out of respect. So there is no concept of the weaponization of sanctions, weaponization of financial instruments. That's a very different way of thinking. So I think we need to do that. Then another way of theorizing international relations, that's the idea of Trigunatit Prakriti. So in the Western IR theoretical frameworks, we mostly hear about realism, liberalism, constructivism. Three different major IR theories. Realism is all human beings about being very brutish and selfish. Mr. M. J. Appar discussed about the balance of power theory, which is the core crux of that. Then liberalism, that human is destined just to cooperate and do business. Another is constructivism, that it's all about perceptions. So in the Western framework, in the Western epistemology, we tend to consider these ideas as absolute. And then some other philosopher would come and they would try to refute. But here, when Lord Krishna says that Prakriti is Trigunatit, Prakriti has Sat, Rajas and Tam, all three at once, at the same time. So human being is not just selfish, human beings at a time. He can be selfish, he is good, he can be rational, he can be emotional. So there are different permutations and combinations of these different gunas and something much beyond that, which is not within the control of the human family. So that also needs to be taken care of. Sorry for the slight exceeding time. And then we also need to take wisdom from astrology, and which can be very helpful in profiling and also in strategic forecasting. I mean, I have really spoken to people who have done some really good forecasting. Regarding the Taliban-Pakistan fight, we were all discussing about whether Taliban would survive or not. Interestingly, there was one astrologer, he's very much on Twitter, Mr. Anil. He made a prediction long back that these are the stars and this is happening and that these guys are going to fight in the next 2 years. It's all on Twitter, right? So I think, just last point, in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, there are enough provisions for the punishment also, but then definitely wars are not waged for any mercantile purposes or for smuggling opium. Wars are not waged for that. Wars are not waged by mercantile companies like East India Company just because the country stops them from smuggling opium. But wars are waged for genuine and real ethical reasons, like the war between Krishna and Magadhan king Jarasandha. When he was deposed, Krishna didn't take his empire. The empire was given back to his son. When Ram defeated Ravan, for the right reason, the empire was given back to his son, Vibhishan. It was not taken back. So this is my brief idea, and I think that's all what I want to say. And I feel that a very systematic and scientific research needs to be done in this case, and I guess the academics have to do a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it is indeed very inspirational and instructive to see these thought processes and how they can really be applied not only in India's foreign policy, but in resolving the problems of the world. You know, earlier people talked about, some of you talked about solution providers, India as solution provider in so many different areas, but this is certainly one of the ways in which we can bring our ancient wisdom to bear on the present problems, and also for shaping the future, as we said. Shall I take advantage of my chairing this panel to read something from my novel, which, by the way, is very much set in a period 1918 to 1950, a time of great turbulence, freedom struggle, where young people were reimagining themselves, they were reimagining the society around them, and they were reimagining the idea of India. Not only how India is going to get freedom and how they are contributing to it, but also what will be a free India like. So this is that seminal moment, I feel too, where, and they were invoking a civilizational reawakening like never before, and getting that confidence back to swallow the sun. And I have used, of course, Muktabai, a 13th century woman saint, her abhang or devotional verse, which talks about how a little ant can fly into the sky and swallow the sun. So young people at that time had that junoon, that the desire and the ambition and the audacity to dare to have faith. And that's the time that we are living in, I hope, for India, but also in how India helps the world. And I would like to quickly read, if I may, a poem. I know I'm standing between you and your dinner. Sorry?
There's one more person standing in between dinner.
Who is it? That's you. Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Okay. So very quickly then. This is a poem which is N.V. Tilak's poem, which I have used, and one of the characters, the woman character, reminds herself of, but it so is applicable to India and its civilizational reawakening. Jauntily holding an elephant calf in one hand, in the other, with a mewling lion cub I stand, the majestic tiger half dead with fear, from his cave cautiously does peer. These mountains are mere rocks to deceive, the waves of the ocean are like trembling leaves. Recognizing myself, my name I proudly bear. I'm truly self-realized and self-aware. Of a mirror I have no need, or a path free of stone and weed. Am I not complete and auspicious, of God's creatures felicitous? I have no more regard for your opinion. I well know my own strength, my own dominion. I think, going to pass on the baton to our next speaker. We have a speaker now.
Thank you for that enlightening discussion, panelists.